Let me tell you something most men get completely wrong about avoidant women, and if you're sitting here thinking it's all about chemistry, attraction, or how good you look, that's exactly why you keep losing her. Listen. If lust was enough, she would have stayed. If attraction was enough, she would have opened up. If physical tension was the key, she wouldn't disappear the moment things start getting real. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Avoidant women don't bond through lust the way you think they do. In fact, lust is often the least powerful trigger for them. It's easy. It's surface level. It doesn't threaten their independence. And because it doesn't threaten them, it also doesn't move them deeply. What actually hits an avoidant woman harder than desire is psychological stimulation, emotional positioning, subtle power shifts, security without pressure. And most men never learn this. You were taught to chase harder, impress more, show more intensity. But intensity often pushes an avoidant further away. What pulls her in is something much quieter and much more powerful. This is where men lose control of the situation, because they focus on how she makes them feel instead of understanding what makes her feel safe enough to bond. Avoidant attachment isn't about not caring. It's about protecting emotional space. And if you don't understand what bypasses that defense system, you'll keep confusing temporary chemistry with real connection. Today, I'm going to break down 5 psychological turn-ons that hit an avoidant woman harder than lust ever could. These aren't tricks. They're patterns. They're shifts in behavior that change how she perceives you internally. And if you understand these, you stop chasing validation and start becoming the kind of man she slowly moves toward on her own. Now let's get into the 5. 1. Emotional self-control is more attractive than passion. Let me say something that might sting a little. The moment you start reacting emotionally to an avoidant woman, you lose leverage. Not because she doesn't care, not because she's cold, but because emotional intensity feels like pressure to her nervous system, and pressure makes her retreat. Most men think passion is attractive. You think showing strong feelings, talking about how much you miss her, reacting when she pulls away, that it proves you care. And yes, in many cases, that works with secure or anxious women. But with an avoidant, emotional self-control hits harder than passion ever will. When you stay calm while she's distant, when you don't panic when she takes space, when you don't demand reassurance, something shifts inside her. Because what she expects is intensity. She expects you to chase. She expects emotional escalation. She expects you to take her distance personally. And when you don't, creates psychological curiosity. Now she's wondering why you're steady. Now she's wondering why you're not reacting. Now she feels safe, not pressured. Here's the deeper layer most men miss. Avoidant women are highly sensitive to emotional demands, even subtle ones. When a man becomes emotionally reactive, it signals dependency. And dependency feels heavy to someone who values autonomy. But when you maintain emotional regulation, you communicate strength without saying a word. You're basically telling her, I enjoy you, but I don't need you to regulate my emotions. That is powerful. It removes the invisible weight she's bracing against. Let's make this practical. She takes longer to reply. Most men double text, overthink, ask what's wrong. You continue your day. She says she needs space. Most men try to convince her otherwise. You respect it calmly. She pulls back emotionally. Most men push for clarity immediately. You observe. You don't escalate. This isn't about playing games. It's about internal stability. When you're emotionally steady, she feels less trapped. And paradoxically, when she feels less trapped, she moves closer. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Avoidant women are not turned on by intensity. They're turned on by safety that doesn't suffocate them. Emotional self-control creates that safety. Now let me challenge you a little. Some of you say you're calm, but internally, you're spiraling. You're checking her last scene. You're rereading messages. You're analyzing tone shifts. That energy leaks. Women can sense when a man is emotionally unsettled, even if he pretends to be composed. So this isn't about acting calm. It's about becoming calm. And that requires discipline. It requires you to build a life outside of her. to have goals, to have purpose, to not sit around waiting for validation. When you regulate yourself first, you become grounded. And grounded men feel safe. And safety is a psychological turn-on for someone who is wired to guard their independence. Passion is loud. Self-control is quiet. And quiet confidence makes an avoidant lean in because it doesn't threaten her autonomy. If you master this one shift, controlling your emotional reactions instead of letting them control you, you stop triggering her defense system. And when her defense system isn't activated, that's when real bonding starts. 2. Mystery beats constant reassurance. Let me lean in and tell you something most men never hear. The more you try to make an avoidant woman feel secure through constant reassurance, the less intrigued she becomes. That sounds backwards, I know. You've probably been told that women need reassurance. That consistency means constant communication. That if she pulls back, you should lean in harder and prove your interest. With an avoidant woman, that strategy quietly backfires. Here's why. Avoidant personalities are highly independent internally. They're used to relying on themselves. When someone floods them with reassurance, constant check-ins, emotional affirmations, endless validation, it doesn't always feel comforting. It feels predictable. And predictability removes psychological tension. Now, I'm not telling you to play games. I'm not telling you to ignore her or act cold. That's insecurity in disguise. What I'm saying is this. When she feels like she has completely figured you out, the mystery disappears. And when mystery disappears, her curiosity fades. Curiosity is what pulls her closer. Think about it this way. If she knows, you'll always respond instantly. You'll always over-explain your feelings. You'll always reassure her no matter what. You'll always be available emotionally on demand. Where's the mental engagement? Avoidant women bond slowly through intrigue, not intensity. When you're slightly unpredictable, not unstable, but layered, she has to think about you. She has to wonder what you're doing. She has to process you instead of managing you. And that mental processing is a psychological turn-on. Here's the key difference most men miss. Reassurance says, "Don't worry, I'm here." Mystery says, "You don't fully have me figured out yet." The second one stimulates her mind. Now let's be clear. Mystery is not silence. Mystery is not manipulation. Mystery is not withholding affection to gain control. Mystery is depth. It's having a full life that she doesn't have complete access to. It's having opinions you don't soften just to please her. It's not explaining every move you make. When you overshare early, you remove tension. When you constantly clarify your intentions, you remove challenge. When you reassure excessively, you remove polarity. And for an avoidant, that makes the connection feel heavier, not lighter. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Avoidant women don't lean in when they feel emotionally flooded. They lean in when they feel mentally engaged. Let me challenge you a bit. Some of you over-communicate because you're anxious. You think transparency equals security. But sometimes transparency is just fear of losing her. And she can feel that. When a man is comfortable not over-explaining himself, it signals self-trust. When he's okay letting moments breathe instead of filling silence, it signals confidence. That confidence creates attraction without pressure. So instead of constantly reassuring her, let her wonder what you're focused on. Let her feel your presence without always dissecting it. Let her experience you in layers. When she doesn't feel like she has to manage your emotions, and when she doesn't feel like she fully owns the emotional script, something interesting happens. She starts investing. She starts reaching out. She starts trying to understand you. And when an avoidant woman starts leaning forward mentally, that's far more powerful than any temporary rush of desire. Because lust fades quickly, but psychological intrigue? That lingers. 3. Respecting her space turns her on more than closeness. Let's be honest for a second. When she says she needs space, most men hear rejection. You take it personally. You assume she's losing interest. You start thinking there's someone else. And even if you don't say it out loud, your energy changes. You get tense. You get watchful. You get reactive. And that reaction is exactly what makes her pull back even more. Here's what you need to understand. For an avoidant woman, Space is not the opposite of attraction. Space is how she regulates attraction. Closeness, especially emotional closeness, can feel overwhelming to her nervous system. Not because she doesn't like you. Not because she doesn't feel something. But because intimacy triggers vulnerability. And vulnerability feels risky. When you interpret her need for space as a threat, you respond with pressure. You try to fix it. You try to close the gap. You try to increase communication. But when you respect her space calmly and confidently, something powerful happens. You stop triggering her defense system. And that alone changes everything. Respecting her space shows emotional maturity. It shows you are secure enough not to cling. It shows that you don't collapse when she creates distance. And that stability feels safe. Avoidant women are highly sensitive to feeling trapped. Even subtle pressure can register as control. So when you allow space without resentment, without passive aggression, without silent punishment, you signal freedom. Freedom is attractive to someone who values independence. Now here's the part that may challenge you. Some of you say you give her space, but you're doing it with tension. You're counting the days. You're expecting her to come back quickly. You're silently testing her. That's not space. That's delayed pressure. Real space means you genuinely continue your life. You stay focused on your goals. You keep your routine. You don't pause your world waiting for her next move. And when she senses that you're not emotionally collapsing, she relaxes. Because what scares an avoidant woman most is feeling responsible for someone else's emotional stability. If she feels like your mood depends on her attention, she feels burdened. But if she feels like you're steady regardless, she feels safer leaning in. Here's the shift. Instead of thinking, she's pulling away from me, start thinking, she's regulating herself. When you understand that, you stop reacting from ego. You also stop chasing closeness at the wrong time. Closeness forced too early feels suffocating. Closeness allowed to develop naturally feels exciting. When you respect her boundaries without negotiation, you demonstrate strength. When you don't argue with her need for space, you demonstrate confidence. And confidence is attractive. Not loud confidence. Not dominance. Not control. Calm, grounded confidence. The kind that says, I'm here. I enjoy you. But I don't need to force anything. That energy lowers her guard. And here's the interesting part. When she doesn't feel pressured, she often closes the distance herself. Because now the connection feels voluntary. And voluntary closeness is far more powerful than demanded closeness. If you can master this, truly respecting her space without internal panic, you stop pushing her away unintentionally. You give her room to choose you. And when an avoidant woman feels like choosing you is safe, that's when she starts leaning in on her own. 4. Leadership without control is irresistible. Let me say this calmly, but clearly. Some of you confuse leadership with control, and that confusion is costing you. You think being decisive means telling her what to do. You think being strong means correcting her constantly. You think taking charge means managing her emotions, her schedule, or her behavior. An avoidant woman shuts down around that energy. Not because she hates leadership, but because she can smell control from a distance. And control feels like a cage. Here's what actually works. Leadership without control. That means you move with direction. You make decisions. You have standards. You know what you want. But you don't try to manage her. That balance is rare. And rare things are attractive. Avoidant women respect strength, but they resist domination. The moment she feels like you're trying to steer her life instead of steering your own, her independence alarms go off. She becomes distant, quiet, guarded. Now let me challenge you a bit. Some of you don't actually lead, you react. You wait to see how she feels. Then you adjust your tone. You wait to see if she approves. Then you decide. You soften your standards to avoid conflict. That's not leadership. That's fear of losing her. And fear is not attractive. Real leadership is internal. It's knowing your direction in life. It's having plans without asking for permission. It's inviting her into your world, not reshaping yourself to fit into hers. And here's the part that might wake you up. If your entire emotional state shifts based on how she responds to you, you're not leading. You're following her emotional rhythm. An avoidant woman doesn't feel safe with a man who is emotionally dependent on her reactions. It makes her feel responsible, and responsibility feels heavy. But when you lead calmly, without trying to control, she feels something different. She feels steadiness. For example, you suggest plans confidently, but you're not offended if she declines. You express your preferences clearly, but you don't argue her into agreement. You set boundaries respectfully, but you don't threaten or manipulate. That combination signals strength without force. And strength without force is psychologically attractive. Let's be honest for a second. Some men overcorrect when they hear this. They become rigid. They become emotionally unavailable. They act distant to appear alpha. That's insecurity wearing a mask. Leadership is not coldness. It's not silence. It's not dominance. It's grounded direction. When she sees that you have a life, values, and standards that don't bend under pressure, she respects you. When she sees that you don't try to dominate her autonomy, she relaxes. Because now she doesn't feel trapped. Here's the advice you might need to hear. Stop trying to control the outcome. Stop trying to manage her feelings. Stop trying to secure her commitment through pressure. Instead, focus on building a life and mindset so solid that you don't need to force anything. When you lead yourself well, she will naturally decide whether she wants to follow your direction. And if she does, it won't be because you controlled her. It'll be because she respects you. And respect, especially for an avoidant woman, hits much deeper than surface-level attraction ever could. 5. Non-neediness creates obsession. Let me say something that most men won't like hearing. The more you need her, the less she feels drawn to you. And I'm not talking about caring. I'm not talking about liking her. I'm talking about emotional dependence disguised as love. Avoidant women are highly sensitive to neediness. The moment they feel like they are becoming someone's emotional anchor, someone's source of validation, stability, or identity, their instinct is to create distance. Because neediness feels like responsibility, and responsibility feels heavy. Now here's where it gets controversial. Non-neediness is not indifference. It's not pretending you don't care. It's not playing hard to get. Non-neediness is internal abundance. It's when you genuinely enjoy her presence, but your happiness doesn't depend on it. That difference is subtle, but powerful. When she senses that you want her but don't require her, something shifts psychologically. You become a choice, not a burden. And here's what most men misunderstand. Obsession doesn't grow from pressure. It grows from uncertainty mixed with safety. When you are emotionally steady, when you're not constantly seeking reassurance, when you're not asking, "Where is this going?" Every week, she has room to think about you, room to miss you, room to wonder. Neediness eliminates space. Non-neediness creates tension. And tension fuels attraction. Now let's make this personal. If your mood drops every time she's distant, if your confidence shakes when she delays a reply, if you feel anxious when she doesn't affirm you, she feels that energy. And even if she doesn't consciously identify it, her body registers it as pressure. But when you remain centered, when you continue building your goals, maintaining your routine, focusing on your purpose, she sees a man whose world doesn't collapse over attention shifts. That stability is magnetic. Here's the calm truth. Avoidant women don't fall for intensity. They fall for strength that doesn't chase. And strength without chasing looks like non-neediness. It looks like you have standards. You have direction. You have options in life. Not necessarily other women, but other sources of fulfillment. You are fulfilled before she enters the picture. Now let me challenge you. Some of you say, "I'm just expressive." But sometimes what you call expression is subtle dependency. If you constantly need reassurance to feel secure, that's something you have to build internally, not extract from her. Because when you extract emotional security from someone who fears emotional entanglement, you activate their withdrawal response. But when you generate your own security, you become intriguing. She starts asking herself, "Why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he chasing? Why does he seem so grounded?" And that curiosity pulls her closer. Here's the final shift. Non-neediness is attractive because it signals self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency feels safe. Safety lowers defenses. And when her defenses are lowered voluntarily, not forced, she invests emotionally on her own timeline. That's when attachment deepens. Not because you pressured it, but because you didn't. Let me end this in a way that might challenge you. If you're constantly trying to win an avoidant woman through passion, intensity, or physical chemistry, you're fighting the wrong battle. Because what bonds her isn't how strongly you feel. It's how stable you are. Here's the controversial truth. Most men don't lose avoidant women because they didn't care enough. They lose them because they cared in a way that felt emotionally heavy. Self-control, mystery, respect for space, leadership without control, non-neediness. These aren't tactics. They're traits. And if you develop these traits, you don't just attract avoidant women. You become a more grounded man overall. The real shift is this. Stop trying to manage your reactions and start mastering your own. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever noticed her pulling away when you leaned in too hard? Have you experienced her coming closer when you focused on yourself instead? Drop your experience in the comments. I actually read them. And if you're serious about understanding these dynamics on a deeper level, subscribe and stay connected. We're not here to chase. We're here to grow, and let the right connection meet us there.